The flight from Houston landed 40 minutes early. That was the first thing that changed everything. Not a confrontation, not a confession, not any of the dramatic pivots people imagine when they picture the moment a life splits in two. It was a gate change, a tailwind, an airline getting something right for once. Rachel Connor collected her carry-on from the overhead bin, texted her assistant that she'd be in the office by noon, and settled into the back of a rideshare with her laptop open before the car left the terminal. She needed the Henderson bid packet. She'd saved it to the shared cloud folder she and Owen used for household documents, insurance policies, appliance warranties, the scanned deed to the rental property on Clover Street. She'd uploaded it there 2 weeks ago by accident, meaning to drop it into her work drive, and hadn't moved it. She opened the folder on her screen. The Henderson file was there, so was something else. A subfolder she didn't recognize. It had been created 6 days ago, the day after she left for Houston. It was titled in plain text, without any apparent caution or shame, "New House." Rachel's thumb hovered over the touchpad. She opened it. 47 photographs. Their house, the house she had purchased in 2016, 3 years before she married Owen Connor, the house she had repainted and refinished and rewired and loved into something real, looked back at her from the screen in colors she did not choose. The kitchen had new hardware. Brushed gold, not the matte black she'd spent 2 Saturdays installing herself. The living room held a sectional sofa the color of wet concrete, enormous and low and foreign, where her grandmother's reading chair used to sit. The accent wall behind the fireplace had been painted a shade of terracotta she would never have selected in her life. New curtains, new light fixtures, new throw pillows stacked with the deliberateness of a staging shoot. Each photograph had a caption. "My new kitchen. Obsessed with this wall color. Finally feels like home." The captions were not in Owen's handwriting. They were not written by anyone who lived in that house. Rachel read them all. She looked at every photograph. She did not rush. She did not skip to the end. She sat in the back of that rideshare with the Tennessee humidity pressing against the windows, and she looked at 47 images of her home being redecorated for another woman, and she did not make a sound. The driver asked if she was cold. She said no. She said it the way people say things when the answer doesn't matter. At the bottom of the folder, she found what Owen had apparently saved there thinking no one would look, or perhaps simply not thinking at all, that peculiar arrogance of men who believe they are invisible because they have not yet been caught. 11 receipt images, Furniture World of Nashville, accent drapes and design, a custom upholstery shop in East Nashville called Taft and Morris, a delivery confirmation from a company called Home Base Staging that listed their address, Rachel's address, the address on her deed, as the delivery site. The total across all 11 receipts was $23,440. Owen Connor had spent $23,440 redecorating Rachel's house, while she was 600 miles away presenting infrastructure bid proposals to the Henderson County Transportation Authority. She closed the laptop. She looked out the window. They were on the interstate now, the city rising in the distance, ordinary and indifferent. A billboard advertised a personal injury attorney. A truck changed lanes without signaling. The sun was doing what the sun does in Tennessee in April, which is arrive with a kind of blunt insistence that acknowledges no one's feelings. Rachel Connor sat very still. Not the stillness of shock, not the stillness of someone whose mind has gone blank. The stillness of someone whose mind has gone completely, absolutely clear, like a lens snapping into focus, like a room where all the furniture has just revealed itself after years of standing in the dark. She understood what she was looking at. She understood what it meant. She understood, with a precision that felt almost clinical, the scope of what had been happening in this marriage, and for how long and what it would require of her now. She did not cry. She did not call Owen. She did not call her mother. She opened her laptop again and forwarded the entire shared folder, every photograph, every receipt, the folder metadata with its creation date, to her own personal email address. Then she opened a new contact in her phone and typed a name she had heard at a professional women's network event 18 months ago. Vivienne Cole-esque. She did not call yet. She just made sure the name was there. The rideshare pulled onto her street at 9:47 in the morning. She saw Owen's truck in the driveway. She paid the driver. She put her carry-on over her shoulder. She stood on the sidewalk outside the house she owned and looked at it for a moment with completely new eyes. Then she walked inside and said good morning. To understand what Rachel Connor represented, to Owen, to their community, to anyone watching from the outside, you had to start not with the marriage but with the work. She had grown up in North Nashville, the older of two children raised by a woman who managed other people's money by day and stretched her own by night with the practiced economy of someone who understood that dignity and scarcity were not mutually exclusive. Her father, Roosevelt Blackwood, had been a contractor, small residential jobs, mostly foundation repairs and room additions in neighborhoods the larger firms didn't find worth their time. He had died when Rachel was 26, during her second year of working in project management for a mid-sized infrastructure firm, and he had left her three things: a 2004 pickup truck with 140,000 miles on it, a box of drafting tools he'd carried since trade school, and a writing desk he'd found at an estate sale in Germantown that he'd been in the process of refinishing when his heart gave out on a Thursday morning in October. The desk was unfinished. One leg still needed staining. The drawer handle on the right side was missing. Rachel had kept it in her garage through 2 apartments and the house she eventually bought on Chestnut Grove Drive, always meaning to finish it, never quite ready, as though completing it would close something she wasn't prepared to close. She had bought the Chestnut Grove house in August of 2016 for $287,000. She had put 30% down. She had negotiated the closing costs herself because she had read the HUD-1 settlement statement line by line the night before and knew which fees were negotiable and which were not. The mortgage broker had seemed surprised. Most people weren't that prepared. Rachel had found his surprise faintly exhausting. By that point, she was a senior project manager at Meridian Infrastructure Partners, overseeing a portfolio of public works contracts worth a combined $40 million annually. She managed bid packages, subcontractor compliance, union labor schedules, material procurement timelines, and the particular diplomatic complexity of keeping municipal clients satisfied while keeping crews on budget. She was the person project directors called when something was going wrong and they needed it not to go wrong anymore. She had a reputation for being quiet in meetings and correct in her assessments, which in her industry was worth more than most people's loudness. She met Owen Connor at a mutual friend's dinner party in the fall of 2017. He was charming in the specific way that reveals itself slowly, not the sharp, immediate charm that announces itself and invites suspicion, but the quieter, more careful kind that arrives in attentiveness and small, remembered details. He brought coffee the way she'd mentioned she liked it the second time they met. He listened when she talked about work in a way that felt, for a long time, like genuine interest. He was a financial advisor at a regional wealth management firm, comfortable, steady, a man who understood compounding returns and long-term thinking, or at least could speak the language convincingly. They married in May of 2019 in a ceremony at Aunt Gloria's house in Brentwood, Rachel's great-aunt, 81 years old, the family's moral center of gravity, a woman who had raised 4 children, buried 1 husband, and outlasted 3 Baptist churches. 40 people. A caterer from the neighborhood. Rachel wore her grandmother's pearls. Her brother Darnell walked her down the aisle because that was what their father would have wanted. Owen moved into the Chestnut Grove house. They redecorated together, or so Rachel had believed. She had wanted the matte black hardware. She had wanted the reading chair that had been her grandmother's. She had wanted the particular quiet the house held in the mornings before the street woke up. Owen had agreed with everything, or seemed to. That was the thing about Owen Connor. He was very good at seeming. For 4 years the marriage looked, from the outside, exactly like what it was supposed to look like. 2 professionals, a well-maintained house, Christmas with Aunt Gloria. Rachel's career accelerating, her firm landing larger and larger contracts, her name appearing in project credits for a highway interchange in Rutherford County that came in 3 weeks under schedule. Owen's income steady, his hours occasionally unpredictable, his explanations for those hours always reasonable. Rachel had noticed things. A woman notices things. She noticed the rhythm of his phone going face down on tables. She noticed certain evenings when he was present in body, but had clearly departed elsewhere in mind. She noticed that he had stopped asking about her projects with the specific curiosity she had initially mistaken for interest, and had replaced it with a generalized nod that meant he had stopped listening. But she had filed these observations carefully and not acted on them, because she was a woman who understood the difference between a pattern and a moment, and she was still in the process of determining which this was. The Henderson trip had clarified everything. When Rachel walked into the Chestnut Grove house on that April morning and said good morning to Owen, who was standing in the kitchen in a robe, surprised to see her and performing surprise badly, she looked at the new hardware on the cabinets and the new sofa visible through the living room doorway and the terracotta wall, and she smiled. "You updated things," she said. Her voice was completely neutral. "Yeah," he recovered quickly. She gave him that. "I figured while you were gone I'd surprise you, do something nice for the house." She looked around slowly. "It's a lot of work for 1 week." "Had some help," he paused. "Hired a contractor." She nodded. She set her bag down. She went to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water and stood at the counter drinking it while he watched her, searching her face for something: relief, gratitude, suspicion, and finding nothing because she had decided, in the back of that rideshare, that he would find nothing until she was ready. "It looks beautiful," she said. Then she went upstairs to change for work. In the garage, on her way back out, she stopped for exactly 30 seconds beside her father's writing desk. One leg still unfinished, the drawer handle still missing. She put her hand on the surface, which was smooth where Roosevelt had gotten to it and rough where he hadn't. Then she got in her car and went to the office. She waited 3 days before she made her first call. Not because she was uncertain. Not because she was hopping she had misread what she'd seen. She waited 3 days because she needed to understand the full shape of what she was dealing with before she moved, and she needed those 3 days to be days Owen saw nothing. She cooked dinner on Monday. She asked about his week. She sat across from him at the table they'd bought together from a craftsman in Laper's Fork and listened to him talk about a client portfolio and made the correct sounds of interest and attention. She had been doing this work. She understood now, in some form or another, for longer than she knew. On Tuesday, she went to lunch with Darnell. Her brother was 41, 2 years younger, and worked in property management. He was a quiet man in the way that people who grew up watching their mother stretch a dollar become quiet, not shy, not without opinions, but deeply conservative with what he let out into the world. He was also the person Rachel trusted with the things she would not say aloud to anyone else. She slid her phone across the table with the folder open. He looked at it without speaking for a long time. "How long?" he said. "I don't know yet." He nodded. He looked at one more photograph. Then he put the phone face down on the table and picked up his fork and ate for a moment in silence. "What do you need?" he said. "I need someone to find out who she is." He nodded again. That was the entire conversation. She trusted him because he did not need it to be more. That evening she called Vivienne Cole. Vivienne Cole had built her practice over 31 years in family law and asset litigation. She was 58, small, and had the quality of stillness that belongs to people who have sat across from too many lies to be surprised by the creative range of human dishonesty. She had been named in a Bar Journal profile 3 years earlier as one of the top 10 family law attorneys in Tennessee. Rachel had read the profile twice before she dialed. "Tell me what you have," Vivienne said after the introductions. Rachel told her. She did it the same way she would brief a project director in sequence with dates without editorializing. The shared cloud folder, the 47 photographs, the 11 receipts totaling $23,440, the captions, the creation date of the subfolder, 6 days ago, the fact that she was gone for 6 days. There was a pause on the line. Do you have a joint account with your husband? 2. Checking and a savings. And a joint ownership on a rental property. Clover Street, single family. We bought it together in 2021. I need you to print your bank statements going back 18 months, Vivienne said. All accounts. Do not do this from a shared computer. Do not mention this call to your husband. Come in Thursday at 10. I'll be there. One more thing, Vivienne said. Have you confronted him? No. A pause that felt like approval. Good, don't. Rachel printed the bank statements that night from her work laptop in her office at 11 p.m. when the floor was empty. 18 months of joint checking. 18 months of joint savings. She sat in the light of her monitor and read through them with the same methodical attention she brought to subcontractor compliance audits, and she found what she had not been looking for because she had not yet known to look. Between February of the previous year and the present month, 14 months, there were 43 transfers out of their joint savings account ranging from $800 to $3,200, all coded as either MISC, transfer or investment reallocation, all moving to an account she didn't recognize. The total across all 43 transfers was $67,400. She did not react. She put the statements in a manila envelope, wrote Henderson Bid Supplemental on the front, and filed it in her work bag. Then she went home and made dinner and poured Owen a glass of the wine he liked and sat across from him while he talked about his Thursday client calls. And she was, by every observable measure, exactly where she had always been. Vivienne Cole's office occupied the top floor of a restored building on Commerce Street, exposed brick, low bookshelves, afternoon light that came in at a slant and made everything feel considered. She had an assistant who moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that every file in this office represented someone's worst month. Rachel sat across from Vivienne on Thursday morning and put the manila envelope on the desk. Vivienne opened it and read for 11 minutes without speaking. Then she said, I want to bring in Howard Birch. Howard Birch was a forensic accountant who had worked with Vivienne on 12 cases over 8 years. He was 63, white-haired, and spoke about money the way pathologists spoke about cause of death, with a clinical precision that contained no judgment, because judgment was not the instrument he used. He arrived at the office that same afternoon. He looked at the statements for 7 minutes. The receiving account, he said. Do you know what it belongs to? No. I'll find out by Monday. He closed the envelope. There's a pattern here. The amounts are variable to avoid flagging. Someone helped him do this. His accountant, Vivienne asked. Or he read something online. I've seen both. He paused. Has there been any change in your household expenses in the past year that you could track to something specific? A membership, a subscription, a regular payment? Rachel thought about it. He started paying for a storage unit 8 months ago. He said it was for his office overflow. Howard Birch wrote this down without expression. Address. She gave it to him. Darnell delivered his report on Sunday evening by text, which read, Name is Danielle Boyd. Works in PR, been with the same firm 4 years. Divorced 2020. I'm still pulling threads. Call me tomorrow morning. She called him at 7. The threads, she said. Danielle Boyd has been involved with 2 other married men in the last 6 years, Darnell said. He was speaking from his car, she could tell by the acoustics. One in Memphis, they sued for alienation of affection in 2021, settled out of court. The other one in Knoxville, that relationship ended when the wife found out and the man cut it off. But here's what's interesting. She heard him pull up something on his phone. Both those men are in financial services. Rachel was quiet. She has a type, Darnell said. And it's not just the personal thing. Memphis case, the attorney on file said she had access to accounts. She knew things she shouldn't have known. They couldn't prove anything, but they believed she was extracting. Are you saying she targets men with financial access? I'm saying the pattern looks like that. I'm saying Owen is not the first person she has done this with, and the first 2 times someone else paid the price. Vivienne, when Rachel relayed this, was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, "Tell your brother to document everything he has. I want it in a format I can use." Howard called on Monday as promised. The receiving account was registered to an LLC. The LLC was called D&M Properties. It had been registered with the Tennessee Secretary of State's office 9 months ago. Its registered members were 2 people, Danielle Boyd and Owen Connor. Howard's voice on the phone was completely flat when he said, "The storage unit is also registered under the LLC. There are 2 vehicles, and there's a condominium on Belmont Boulevard purchased 63 days ago. Purchase price $318,000, paid via D&M Properties. The down payment was $71,000. Rachel did the arithmetic in her head without being asked. The $67,400 siphoned from their savings, plus what must have been other sources, had become the down payment on a home that was not hers. "The condominium," she said, "whose name is on the deed?" D&M Properties LLC. She understood then the full geometry of what Owen Connor had built. Not a fling, not even a sustained affair. A parallel architecture, a new financial structure, a new home, a new legal entity constructed in the borrowed time of their marriage, in the margin between her work trips and his supposedly late evenings, in the space she had given him by trusting that she did not need to audit her own husband. She added the Howard Birch call to the Manila folder, which was no longer a Manila folder. Vivienne had given her a physical folder the first day. Blue, legal size, heavy stock. It sat now on the corner of Vivienne's desk and already held the printed statements, Darnell's documented findings, Howard's initial analysis, and the LLC registration documents Howard had pulled from the Secretary of State's database. Rachel looked at it the way she looked at a project folder in its early stages, with the understanding that it would grow, and that its growth was its purpose. They had one more team member. Vivienne mentioned her at the end of the Monday call. "I want Aunt Gloria in the room when this concludes," she said. Rachel paused. "Why?" "Because she is your family's moral witness. Because her presence says something that documents can't. And because," Vivienne said, with a dryness Rachel was beginning to appreciate deeply, "Owen Connor is going to need to feel the weight of who he betrayed, not just what he owed." Rachel called Aunt Gloria that evening. The old woman listened. She said 3 words, "I'll be there." April became May. Rachel Connor went to work every morning at 7:30. She managed the Henderson contract, which had come in, and a new bid package for a stormwater drainage project in Williamson County worth $8.4 million. She supervised a crew of 14 subcontractors across 2 active sites. She answered emails. She attended meetings. She built things. She came home every evening by 6:30 and made dinner 3 nights a week. The other nights Owen cooked or they ordered out. She asked about his clients. She maintained the rhythm of their household with the same precision she brought to construction schedules. She was not performing happiness. She did not smile more than usual, did not exert extra warmth, did not overcorrect in any direction that might signal a change in her understanding of her circumstances. She was simply present, controlled. Exactly what she had always appeared to be. Owen appeared, during this period, moderately content. He had the specific ease of a man who believes he has successfully managed a situation, who has built his exit ramp, laid out his timeline, and is now simply waiting for the appropriate moment to take it. He was attentive in the way that guilty people sometimes are, performing version of his better self as a form of management, though whether it was management of her suspicion or his own conscience she couldn't tell and didn't need to. He said it on a Tuesday evening in the 3rd week of May, while they were eating the pasta she'd made, and he was looking at the terracotta wall behind the fireplace with something that could only be described as quiet satisfaction. "You know," he said, "I know I did it without asking all the redecorating, but I wanted it to feel more like a home." She looked at the wall. She looked at him. "It does," she said. "It really does." She noted the phrase, filed it. Howard Birch, meanwhile, was building his own folder. By the 3rd week of May, He had traced the full flow of the $67,400 from their joint savings into D&M Properties LLC, documented the condo purchase, identified 2 vehicles registered under the LLC that Owen was using for what Howard described, in his characteristic economy of language, as personal purposes inconsistent with a business entity, and begun the process of calculating the total dissipation of marital assets, a legal term that would carry weight in front of a judge. His total, including the furniture receipts, the LLC-funded vehicles, and the diverted savings, was $114,820. When Vivienne received his preliminary report, she said, "Good," the way surgeons say it when a scan confirms what they already knew. Darnell, in the 3rd week of May, completed his surveillance documentation. He had followed Owen on 4 separate evenings. He had documented meetings with Danielle Boyd at a restaurant in the Gulch, at the Belmont condo, and once at a coffee shop on 12th Avenue South, where they had sat across from each other for 90 minutes, and Danielle had shown Owen something on her phone, and he had smiled in a way that Darnell photographed from across the street with a long lens. In 3 of the 4 surveillance events, Owen's vehicle was parked in front of the Belmont condo, the condominium purchased with Rachel's money, for periods ranging from 2 to 4 hours. Darnell delivered his documentation to Vivienne without delivering it to Rachel. He texted his sister only, "Done, it's solid." She texted back, "Thank you." He texted, "Dad would have liked this part." She put her phone in her pocket and went back to the Williamson County stormwater bid. The blue folder was now 3 inches thick. Vivienne's assistant had placed a rubber band around it to keep it organized. In Rachel's garage, her father's writing desk stood in the corner where it always had. She had not touched it since the morning she came back from Houston. On a Friday night in early June when Owen was out, at a client dinner, he said, and she had not contradicted him. She knew where he was. Rachel went into the garage in old clothes and sat down on the stool beside her father's desk. She opened the can of stain she'd bought 3 years ago and never fully used. She dipped a cloth. The smell of it was immediate and specific, mineral and wood, and something that her hands remembered even if she hadn't done it in a long time. She worked on the unfinished leg. She didn't hurry. The garage was cool and quiet, and through the small high window she could see the sky going from blue to purple to the particular dark of a Tennessee June night. She was not thinking about Owen. She was thinking about Roosevelt Blackwood, who had stood in garages exactly like this one his whole working life, and understood something about how patience and skill were the only things that couldn't be taken from you. She was thinking about what it meant to finish something, not as an act of defiance, not as a message to anyone, simply as the thing that came next. She worked for 2 hours. Then she put the stain away, washed her hands, and went inside. Vivienne called on Monday morning. "Howard's final report is ready. I need you in my office Tuesday at 9. She was there at 8:55. Howard stood at the conference table with a printed document that ran to 41 pages. He walked her through it the way he walked through everything, in sequence, without inflection, with a precision that felt almost like mercy because it left no room for ambiguity. Total documented dissipation of marital assets, $114,820. Total diverted from joint savings, $67,400. Total expended on furniture and renovations at marital home for non-marital purposes, $23,440. D&M Properties LLC valuation, including condo and vehicles, estimated $389,000. Owen Connor's equity share of D&M Properties, 50%. Rachel's claim on that equity as a marital asset, depending on court classification, potentially full. He used marital funds to capitalize a business that he co-owns with his extramarital partner, Howard said. Under Tennessee law, that creates a compelling case for dissipation. Your attorney can speak to the likelihood of recovery better than I can. Very likely, Vivienne said. The LLC was also used to pull the permits for the renovation at the marital home, Howard continued. He moved a page forward. That's actually the interesting part. He placed a sheet on the table. It was a copy of a building permit application from the Metro Nashville Permits Office. The job address was Chestnut Grove Drive, Rachel's house. The contractor of record was listed as a sole proprietor named Pete Solis, DBA Solis Renovation. The permit applicant, the entity that had requested and signed for the permits, was D&M Properties, LLC. He pulled permits on your house through their company, Howard said, which means the renovation of your marital home is documented as a business transaction of a business you were never told existed. The room was quiet. Vivienne placed the Howard Birch report on top of the blue folder. The folder was now 4 inches thick. She pressed it flat with both hands and looked at it for a moment. "Tuesday after next," she said. "I want to talk about the contractor." On a Saturday afternoon in mid-June, Darnell texted Rachel a single audio file. He had placed a directional microphone, legally, from a public street, near a table at the Gulch restaurant where Owen and Danielle met with some regularity. The recording was 44 minutes long. Rachel listened to the first 12 minutes during a drive, and the remainder that evening on her back porch with a glass of sweet tea and the sound of her neighbor's lawnmower fatting into the distance. The conversation covered, in sequence, the progress of the condo renovation, Owen's timeline for having the conversation with Rachel, Danielle's impatience with that timeline, and Owen's management of that impatience. "She hasn't said a word," Owen said, somewhere around the 7-minute mark. "Not one word she doesn't know." A pause, Danielle's voice. "Owen, you've been saying that for 2 months." "Because it's true. Cam isn't the type to make a scene. She's not," she processes things slowly. "She'll be blindsided and then she'll want it to be clean. That's who she is." Another pause, Danielle. "And when it's clean, when are we in?" "Owen, October. Maybe September if the Clover Street property sells. I'm working on it. I move on my terms." Danielle laughed. It was the laugh of someone who has decided she is holding the cards. "Just make sure it's before the holidays. I want to have people over for Thanksgiving. Properly." Owen made a sound of agreement. "You will." Rachel turned off the audio. She sat on her back porch and looked at her yard, which she had landscaped herself 3 summers ago. The hydrangeas were blooming, blue and enormous in the corner by the fence. A cardinal sat on the top rail and did not move for a long time. She thought about what Owen had said. She processes things slowly. She'll be blindsided. She considered that he had been married to her for 6 years and still believed this. She considered what that said not about malice, but about the specific incuriosity of someone who had stopped paying attention. She took out her phone and texted Vivienne, "I have a recording. Legal public space, sending now." Then she went inside and began preparing dinner. Roast chicken, Owen's preferred Sunday meal, which she made on Saturdays as well sometimes, because she had always liked having it warm in the house on weekend evenings. She was pulling the chicken from the oven when her phone showed a calendar reminder. Mediation prep, Vivienne Cole, 9 a.m. Monday. She set the chicken on the counter. She washed her hands. She poured herself a glass of water and stood at her kitchen counter in the kitchen with its new gold hardware and its terracotta wall, and she looked at it all with the same complete neutrality she had maintained since April. At that same moment, in a condo on Belmont Boulevard purchased with her money, Danielle Boyd was showing Owen a Pinterest board of potential Thanksgiving tablescapes. Rachel put the chicken on the table and called upstairs that dinner was ready. Pete Solis called Vivienne Cole's office on a Wednesday morning in late June. He had found the number through his attorney, who had found it through a series of calls that had begun when Pete realized, several weeks after completing the Chestnut Grove renovation, that something about the job had not settled right in his mind. He came in on a Thursday. He was 61, a third-generation contractor, compact and direct in the manner of men who have spent their lives in work that does not reward imprecision. He sat across from Vivienne and Rachel with his hands flat on the table and said, "I don't know what's happening legally. I just know what I saw, and I've been working in this city for 35 years, and I don't want my name on something that wasn't right." Vivienne said, "Tell me about the job." The job was straightforward. Furniture delivery, staging, paint crew, some fixture work. 2 days, maybe 20 hours of actual labor, but the woman was there the whole time. Which woman? The one who booked the job. Danielle, I think her name was. She had a binder, she had swatches, she knew exactly what she wanted and where it was going. He paused. I asked her just in the normal way, just making conversation. I said, "You and your husband been in this house long?" And she said, he stopped, looked at the table. She said, "Not long enough." But she said it like it was a done deal, like she was already in. The room was quiet. She showed you something, Vivienne said. It was not quite a question. He looked up. Yeah, she showed me the building permit. She had it on her phone, she'd photographed it. She wanted me to have the address confirmed before we started, and on the permit it said D&M Properties as the applicant. I didn't think much of it at the time. Lots of people hold property through LLCs. But when I went to pull the physical permit copy for my records, I looked at the application signature more carefully. There are 2 signatures required when an LLC applies, a member's signature and an officer attestation. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and placed a folded piece of paper on the table. The officer attestation signature on that permit does not match the LLC registration documents I found on the Secretary of State's database. Howard Birch, who had joined them for this meeting, unfolded the paper and looked at it for 15 seconds. Then he looked at Vivienne. That signature, he said, matches the signature on the joint savings account transfer authorizations. Vivienne said, Who signed the transfer authorizations? Rachel. The room was completely still. Rachel looked at the signature. It was her name. It was not her handwriting. Owen Connor, or someone acting with his knowledge, had forged Rachel Connor's signature on a permit application for renovations made to her own house, for the benefit of another woman, funded by money taken from Rachel's own accounts, and had done so on a legal document filed with a government office. Howard Birch spoke first. This moves the matter from civil to potentially criminal. Forgery on a permit application is a Class E felony in Tennessee. Vivienne looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at the signature for a long time. Then she looked up. Add it to the folder, she said. Vivienne put Pete Solis' documentation. His statement, the permit copy, the signature comparison Howard had begun to build on top of the blue folder and pressed it flat. The folder was now 6 inches thick. She looked at her calendar. Let's talk about timing, she said. Vivienne chose the location because location mattered. Not the courthouse, not yet. Not a restaurant or a private home. A mediation room at a firm she had used for years. Neutral ground, conference table, 4 walls and a door that closed. Professional. Witnessed. Documented. The letter to Owen's attorney was formal and contained only what was necessary. His client was requested to attend a mediation session on July 8th at 10 o'clock regarding the status of the marriage and related financial matters. His client should bring counsel. The session would be recorded by a licensed court reporter. Owen's attorney was a man named Garrett Mays who specialized in divorces for high-earning men and who had, according to Vivienne, a tendency toward what she described as aggressive positioning in the early phase. She said this the way someone describes a predictable weather pattern, not threatening, simply relevant. Owen arrived at 10 o'clock with Garrett Mays and the particular confidence of a man who believed he was walking into a preliminary conversation that he would be able to direct. He had dressed carefully. He sat down across from Rachel and looked at her with an expression that had, she noticed, a practiced layer of contrition already applied to it, the expression of a man who has rehearsed an apology and is waiting for the right moment to deliver it, and who believes the apology will function as he intends. He had not looked at the blue folder, which Vivienne had placed on the table in front of Rachel's seat before he arrived. Aunt Gloria sat at the far end of the table in a gray dress and her good pearls. She said nothing. She did not need to. Pete Solis sat against the wall to the right, in a chair slightly outside the main table, present as a disclosed witness. Howard Birch sat beside Vivienne. The court reporter sat at her machine to the left. A notary was present. Garrett Mays looked at the room and recalibrated slightly. He had expected 2 attorneys and 2 clients. This was not that. Vivienne said, "We're going to proceed in a particular order. My client will speak first. I'll interject if necessary. Your client is welcome to take notes." Garrett said, "Vivienne, typically in mediation." "I know how mediation works," Vivienne said. "So does the court reporter." She paused one beat. "Rachel." Rachel had not looked at Owen since she sat down. She looked at him now. She looked at him the way she looked at a structural problem on a job site, with complete attention and no particular feeling about it. She placed her hand on the blue folder. "I have a folder," she said. She opened it. She spoke for 31 minutes. She did not use notes. She had read the contents of that folder so many times in the preceding weeks that she carried it now not on paper, but in her understanding of the situation, in the sequence and the amounts and the dates that formed together the complete architecture of what Owen Connor had built while she was not paying attention. She began with the cloud folder, the 47 photographs, the creation date, the captions. She moved to the 11 receipts. She named each vendor. She stated the dollar amount for each transaction. She gave the total, $23,440. She moved to the bank statements. She named each of the 43 transfers. She gave the total, $67,400. She named the receiving account. She named the LLC. She stated the LLC's registration date. She stated its registered members. She stated it clearly once. D&M Properties LLC, Danielle Boyd, Owen Connor. She described the Belmont condo, its address, its purchase price, the date of closing, the source of the down payment. She described the vehicles. She placed Howard Birch's report on the table. She placed Darnell's surveillance documentation beside it, including the dates and times of Owen's documented presence at the Belmont address. She placed the permit application on the table. She placed the signature comparison Howard had prepared beside it, which showed, in annotated detail, that the signature on the permit did not match any authenticated example of Rachel's actual signature, but did match the transfer authorizations Owen had signed in her name on the joint account. "The transfer authorizations," she said, "are also documented here." She placed them on the table. She placed Pete Solis' signed statement on top. She looked at Owen, who had not moved since she began speaking. His attorney had stopped writing approximately 18 minutes in. "You told me," she said, "that you wanted the house to feel more like a home." She let that sit for a moment. "You used $114,820 of marital assets to build a home for someone else, using a company registered in your name and hers, with permits signed in my name without my knowledge or consent. You did this over 14 months. You did it while living in the house I purchased, while eating the dinners I cooked, while telling me, when I came back from Houston and saw what you had done to my home, that you wanted it to feel more like a home." She closed the folder. She looked at him one more time. She said nothing else. Garrett Mays began. "I think what we need to recognize here is that." Vivienne said, "We have the signature," 4 words, flat and complete. Garrett Mays stopped. The court reporter's machine made its small sound in the silence. Owen Connor looked at the blue folder and then looked at Rachel, and she watched something move across his face. Not the expression he had prepared, not the rehearsed contrition, but something underneath it that had no performance in it at all. She did not feel satisfaction. She felt the particular completion of a person who has finished a very long calculation and found that the answer is exactly what they expected it to be. Aunt Gloria, at the end of the table, had not moved. She did not need to. The legal proceedings took 4 months. Tennessee divorce law, in cases of documented dissipation of marital assets, has a specific mechanism. The court can award the injured party not only their share of the diverted funds, but a premium on top, depending on the severity and duration of the dissipation, and whether any element of fraud was present. The forged signature, the permit application filed with Metro Nashville under her name, was an element of fraud. Howard Birch's report was entered into the court record in full. It was 41 pages, and it contained no ambiguities. The settlement, reached 3 weeks before the case would have gone to trial, awarded Rachel the following: the Chestnut Grove house, in full as her separate property. Full equity in the Clover Street rental property, which was to be transferred to her name within 60 days. The return of $67,400 in diverted savings, plus a dissipation judgment of $47,580, plus attorney fees. And a restraining order barring any use of her name, signature, or identification on any legal document in perpetuity, with criminal consequences for violation. D&M Properties LLC became, in the language of the settlement, a marital asset subject to equitable distribution. Owen's 50% equity in the condo on Belmont Boulevard was frozen during proceedings, and his access to the property was restricted. Danielle Boyd, who was not a party to the divorce but whose finances had been entangled with Owen's through the LLC, found that her 50% equity in the Belmont condo was temporarily inaccessible during the asset freeze. She had surrendered her lease on a previous apartment in anticipation of moving fully into the condo by October, as Owen had promised. When the freeze occurred in August, she was in a position that Owen's promises could not resolve, because Owen's promises had never been assets. They were liabilities that had just come due. The condo, it emerged during Howard's investigation, had a mortgage held by a lender who had required the LLC to maintain a certain financial profile. When the LLC's status became clouded by litigation, the lender flagged the loan for review. The review was not resolved before the settlement required the LLC to be wound down. Danielle Boyd's path to the Belmont condo ended not with a court order, but with a letter from a mortgage servicer that was, in its way, more final. Her credit, which had been leveraged against expectations Owen had created, was not ruined, but it was significantly revised. She moved into a furnished month-to-month apartment in Madison while she sorted out what promises were left. The money she had expected Owen to bring to their shared life, the promises of his position, his income, his access, turned out to have been Rachel's money all along. The ledger, as Howard Birch had noted from the beginning, had two sides. When both sides were finally visible, they balanced. Darnell's documentation of her pattern, the Memphis case, the Knoxville relationship, was made available to the attorney for the Memphis ex-wife, who had settled for less than she was owed in 2021. With Howard's financial analysis now on record and Darnell's documentation supporting a broader pattern, that attorney made a call. The civil matter was reopened. That was not Rachel's business, and she did not follow it closely. She had not built the folder to damage Danielle Boyd. She had built it to document the truth, and the truth, once documented, had its own consequences. Owen Connor retained a one-bedroom apartment in Antioch and a 2019 Lexus that was not part of the LLC. He retained his job, though Rachel understood, through the ordinary intelligence of a small professional city, that the nature of the mediation proceedings had not remained entirely private. A man who has a forensic accountant testify to 14 months of asset dissipation, a forged signature, and a parallel financial structure built on his wife's money does not emerge from that process with his reputation entirely intact. The community has its own ledger. Rachel did not speak about it publicly. She did not post about it. She did not need to. In November, 4 months after the settlement was finalized, Rachel Connor signed a contract with Meridian Infrastructure Partners for the Williamson County Stormwater Drainage Project. $8.4 million, $18 months of work, the largest project she had personally led. She signed it in Vivienne's conference room, for no particular reason except that she liked the table, and Vivienne's assistant brought coffee, and the afternoon light came through the restored brick building's high windows at exactly the right angle. Her name on the contract was clean and specific, and entirely her own. She had moved into an apartment in Germantown in August, a ground-floor unit with a courtyard and good light, close enough to her office to walk in good weather. She had arranged her furniture deliberately, choosing each piece with the slow attention of someone who had learned the difference between building something for yourself and building something for someone else's satisfaction. The rooms were quiet in the mornings. She had grown to love the quiet. The writing desk was in the corner of her study. She had finished it on a Saturday morning in September, working from 8 until noon, the garage of her old house still warm from the summer, but the air beginning to carry the first suggestion of fall. She had stained the last leg, matched the tone precisely to what Roosevelt Blackwood had done to the rest, fitted the missing drawer handle. She had found the exact period-appropriate hardware at an estate shop in East Nashville and sat back and looked at it when she was done. It was complete. It was what it had always been going to be. She ran her hand across the surface, which was smooth and even and smelled faintly of the finish she'd applied, and she felt something that had no name she wanted to put on it, not triumph, not grief, not the particular exhausted relief of having survived something. It was simpler than all of those. It was the feeling of something finished being what it was always meant to be. She had a moving company transport it to the Germantown apartment that same week. It sat in the corner of her study with a small lamp on it and a photograph of Roosevelt Blackwood in his work clothes, grinning in front of a job site on a summer morning in 1997. On the first Saturday in November, a colleague from Meridian named James asked her to dinner. He asked in the specific, slightly careful way of someone who has thought about whether to ask and decided that not asking was the worse outcome. She said yes because he asked real questions about her work, about what she was building, about what she thought, and because she had learned, over the course of a year that had required more of her than she had expected, the difference between someone who is paying attention and someone who is performing it. They ate at a restaurant in the Nations and talked for 3 hours. He asked about the Williamson County project, and she explained, with the particular pleasure she took in technical clarity, exactly what a stormwater drainage system had to do and why the engineering of it was more interesting than most people thought. He listened. He asked follow-up questions. He was not performing curiosity. He was curious. She drove home through the Nashville dark, the city lights familiar and indifferent and entirely her own, and parked on the street in front of her building, and walked up the path to her front door, and put her key in the lock. She stepped inside. The apartment was warm and quiet. The desk stood in the corner of the study, visible through the open doorway, the photograph of Roosevelt beside the lamp. She stood for a moment in her own hallway, in her own home, in the particular stillness of a life that has been reorganized around what is real. She took off her coat. She hung it on the hook she had chosen and installed herself, in the right spot, at the right height, exactly where she wanted it. She closed the door behind her. The ledger was balanced. She was already building something new. If this story resonated with you even a little, I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had a moment where you finally stood up for yourself, and everything changed after that? Share your experience in the comments, and while you're there, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I read more of your stories than you might think, and they truly stay with me. If content like this speaks to you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. There are so many more real-life stories about relationships, choices, and the lessons we learn along the way. Thank you for being here.